Imagine this. A single old car in a Houston scrapyard turns a fired driver into a millionaire truck fleet owner. From zero to unstoppable, this is a story of hustle, grit, and never giving up. Hello everyone. How's it going? Where are you watching this from? And what time is it there? Comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. If you enjoyed this story, tell us in the comments how you liked it. Alright, let's jump straight into today's story. Before sunrise painted the sky over the industrial outskirts of Houston, Texas, a lone transport yard was already alive with movement. Diesel engines rumbled like distant thunder. Headlights sliced through the morning mist, and workers moved quickly between trailers carrying clipboards and coffee cups. Among them was a man whose life revolved around the road. Driving was not just his job, it was the only thing he truly knew how to do well. Every morning began the same way. He arrived early, long before most drivers. Walking past rows of 18-wheelers lined like sleeping giants waiting to wake, he checked tires carefully, inspected cargo straps twice, and wiped dust from mirrors even when no one asked him to. Years on the road had taught him that safety came from discipline, not luck. The transport company he worked for handled factory shipments across multiple states, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and sometimes farther north. The work demanded long hours and relentless schedules. Deadlines mattered more than comfort. Deliveries could not be late, regardless of storms, traffic, or exhaustion. Despite his reliability, he was never treated as valuable. To management, drivers were replaceable parts in a machine built for profit. The owner of the company believed pressure created productivity. He rarely greeted workers and never asked how they were doing. Conversations were short, sharp, and focused on numbers, delivery times, fuel costs, penalties. Mistakes were remembered. Dedication was ignored. Still, the driver endured. He told himself stability mattered more than pride. Bills needed to be paid. Life required patience. For years, he drove without complaint. Winter storms, summer heat waves, overnight hauls, he accepted everything. He slept inside truck cabins more often than in his own bed. Gas station meals replaced home cooking. Highway lights became familiar companions. Other drivers sometimes joked that he worked harder than anyone else. Some admired his consistency. Others warned him he was giving too much to a company that would never appreciate it. He always answered the same way: work honestly, and eventually things improve. But improvement never came. Instead, workloads increased. One particular week changed everything. The company secured a large manufacturing contract requiring non-stop deliveries between Houston and a factory near Dallas. Drivers rotated shifts, but staffing shortages meant fewer people handling more routes. He drove longer hours than usual sometimes, 14 or 15 hours a day. By the third consecutive day, exhaustion settled deep into his bones. His hands felt heavy on the steering wheel, and his eyes burned from lack of sleep. Even simple decisions required effort. When he finally returned to the yard late one evening, he believed he would be allowed to rest. Parking the truck carefully, he shut off the engine and sat quietly for a moment, enjoying the sudden silence. That silence lasted only seconds. A supervisor approached with paperwork for another delivery scheduled immediately. He stared at the documents, confused. Another run. Tonight? He walked into the office and politely explained that he needed rest. Federal driving limits existed for safety, and he was already beyond reasonable fatigue. He asked for only a few hours before leaving again. The owner barely looked up from his desk. "The shipment leaves tonight," he said flatly. "If you can't handle it, someone else will." The driver tried again, explaining the risk. He mentioned fatigue and safety concerns. Instead of understanding, the owner's tone hardened. "This company doesn't stop because you're tired." The words landed heavily. After a long pause, he accepted the keys again. Refusing meant losing income. So he returned to the truck, started the engine, and drove back onto the highway. Night swallowed the road ahead. Traffic thinned as hours passed. Highway lights blurred into long golden lines. He rolled down the window to stay awake, letting cold air strike his face. He turned on the radio, then turned it off again when concentration slipped. Every mile felt longer than the last. Fatigue crept in slowly, first heavy eyelids, then delayed reactions. Then moments where thoughts drifted away from the present. Near midnight, approaching a curved section of highway, everything happened in seconds. A slight delay, pressing the brake pedal, caused the truck to drift too close to the barrier. The trailer scraped against metal, railing with a loud, grinding sound before he regained control and stopped safely on the shoulder. No one was injured. The damage was minor compared to what could have happened, but the company treated it as disaster. He reported the incident immediately following protocol. Within an hour, the owner arrived at the scene. Instead of relief that no one was hurt, anger exploded. The owner shouted loudly enough for roadside workers and passing drivers to hear. Accusations came rapidly: carelessness, incompetence, irresponsibility. Every word ignored the exhaustion he had warned about earlier. The driver attempted to explain. He reminded the owner he had asked for rest. He described how tired he had been. The explanation only fueled more anger. "You drivers always have excuses," the owner snapped. "You cost me money." Humiliation burned deeper than exhaustion. Years of loyalty suddenly felt meaningless. Standing under flashing emergency lights, surrounded by strangers, he realized he was not seen as a person-only liability. Something inside him finally broke. For the first time since joining the company, he answered back. His voice trembled at first, but quickly grew steady. "One day," he said, "I'll own my own truck. I won't work like this forever. And when that day comes, you'll see what I'm capable of." The owner laughed openly, shaking his head. "You own a truck. You're just a driver." The words echoed in the night air. Then came the final blow. "You're fired. Turn in the keys." Just like that, years of service ended on the side of a highway. He handed over the keys silently. A coworker drove him back to the yard. No farewell, no appreciation, only paperwork confirming termination. When he stepped outside the gate, evening had turned into darkness. Trucks continued arriving and leaving, as if nothing had changed. Life moved forward without him. For the first time in years, he had nowhere to go in the morning. Walking along the quiet street, he replayed the argument again and again. Anger mixed with doubt. Had he failed? Was the owner right? But beneath uncertainty, a small spark formed a refusal to remain powerless. That night, sleep did not come easily. He sat by the window watching passing headlights and thinking about roads he had traveled for others. A question slowly took shape. If he could drive thousands of miles for someone else's business, why couldn't he build something of his own? The idea felt impossible at first. He had little savings and no business experience. Yet the thought refused to disappear. The next days were difficult. Job applications led nowhere. Companies wanted younger drivers or offered lower wages. Rejection followed rejection. Still, he kept moving. One afternoon, while wandering through an industrial district searching for opportunity, he noticed a large scrapyard filled with abandoned vehicles. Rusted frames stacked high, broken engines scattered across gravel, and old cars waiting to be dismantled. He walked inside out of curiosity. Among piles of metal and forgotten machines, something caught his attention: a vintage car partially covered in dust and corrosion. Unlike the others, its design hinted at a different era, a time when craftsmanship mattered more than efficiency. Most people would have seen junk. He saw a possibility. Standing there, staring at the silent vehicle, he felt an unexpected certainty. This broken machine somehow mirrored his own situation, underestimated but not finished. He stepped closer, running his hand along the faded metal surface. In that moment, without fully understanding why, he felt that his future had just changed direction, and the first step toward everything ahead had begun. The scrapyard sat on the edge of the city like a forgotten world, surrounded by rusted fences and piles of discarded metal. It was a place where broken things came to wait for their final end. Old pickup trucks, damaged sedans, crushed delivery vans, and dismantled engines lay scattered across gravel. Ground baked by the Texas sun, most people came here only to sell scrap or search for cheap spare parts. No one came looking for opportunity, but he did. After losing his job, days had blended together with uncertainty. Savings were shrinking, confidence was fading, and every rejection from transport companies felt heavier than the last. Yet something about the scrapyard pulled him in, a strange feeling that maybe what others considered useless still had value. As he walked deeper into the yard, the sound of metal clanging echoed nearby. Workers sorted parts, while forklifts moved piles of steel. The air smelled of oil, dust, and heat. Then he saw it again. The old car stood near the back corner, partially hidden behind stacked doors and broken frames. Dust covered its body, and rust marked its edges. But its shape was different from modern vehicles. Long hood, strong lines, classic American design from decades ago. He circled it slowly. The tires were flat, windows cloudy with dirt, the engine clearly none. Anyone experienced with vehicles would assume it belonged in a recycling furnace. Still, he felt drawn toward it. A scrapyard worker noticed him staring and called for the owner, an older man who had spent most of his life surrounded by discarded machines. The owner approached with skeptical eyes and crossed arms. "You looking for parts?" he asked. He shook his head. "I want this car." The owner laughed immediately, assuming it was a joke. "This thing?" he said. "It's scrap metal. We're sending it to a refactoring plant next week. Nobody fixes cars like this anymore." He explained calmly that he wanted to restore it. The owner studied him carefully, noticing worn clothes, tired eyes, and determination that didn't match his situation. "You know nothing about restoration, do you?" the owner asked. "I know machines," he replied, "and I know how to work." The owner shook his head again. "Even if you repair it, parts are rare. Engines probably dead. Transmission gone. You'll waste months and money." He paused before answering. "I don't have many options. I need a chance." A brief silence followed. Workers nearby slowed slightly, listening. Finally, the owner spoke again, this time with curiosity rather than dismissal. "Tell you what," he said. "If you can actually make this car run, you don't pay me anything. But if you fail, it goes back to scrap. Deal." The challenge felt unreal. He agreed instantly. The owner handed him temporary access to the vehicle and pointed toward a small workspace at the edge of the yard. That afternoon marked the beginning of the hardest work of his life. The first days were overwhelming. Opening the hood revealed layers of damaged, corroded wiring, missing components, seized engine parts. Manuals were unavailable. Many pieces were outdated and impossible to find locally, but quitting never crossed his mind. Each morning, he arrived early with basic tools. He cleaned rust carefully, labeled bolts, researched engine designs at public libraries, and watched old mechanical tutorials online using free internet access. Progress came slowly. Hands became covered in grease. Fingernails darkened permanently. Muscles ached from lifting heavy components. Sometimes entire days passed without visible improvement. People walking through the scrapyard often stopped to watch. Some laughed. "Why fix junk?" one worker joked. Others shook their heads sympathetically, convinced he was wasting energy chasing an impossible goal. But every small success fueled him a loosened bolt. Restored wiring, a part salvaged from another vehicle. Weeks turned into months. He learned skills he never expected: engine rebuilding, metal polishing, electrical repair, and precision alignment. Failure became a teacher rather than an enemy. When something broke, he studied why. When parts didn't fit, he adapted solutions. The scrapyard owner occasionally observed from a distance, pretending not to care but secretly impressed by the persistence. One evening, while cleaning layers of dirt from the dashboard, he discovered a faded manufacturer plate revealing the car's true identity. It belonged to a limited production, American model from decades. Earlier rare even when new. Curiosity replaced doubt. He researched further and learned collectors valued restored versions highly. Some sold for extraordinary prices at auctions. For the first time, he realized the project might be more than survival, it could be transformation. Motivation doubled. He invested every remaining dollar into essential components. Nights grew longer as he worked under portable lights. Rainy days slowed progress but never stopped it. There were moments of frustration. An engine assembly failed after hours of work. A replacement part arrived damaged. Tools broke. Savings nearly vanished. More than once he sat quietly beside the car, wondering if everyone else had been right. Yet every time doubt appeared, he remembered the highway argument, the laughter, and the words, "You're just a driver." Those memories pushed him forward. Finally came the day he attempted the first engine start. Workers gathered casually, expecting disappointment. The scrapyard owner leaned against a truck, arms folded. He sat inside the car, hands slightly shaking. Turning the key felt symbolic. If restarting his own life, the engine clicked once. Nothing. He tried again. Another click. Silence. He stepped out, adjusted wiring connections, checked fuel flow, and returned to the seat. One more attempt. The engine coughed. A burst of smoke escaped the exhaust. Then suddenly, the motor roared alive. The sound echoed across the scrapyard, loud and powerful. Workers froze in disbelief. The owner straightened instantly, eyes wide. After months of silence, the car lived again. He laughed quietly, overwhelmed with relief. Exhaustion disappeared, replaced by pride he had never felt before. The owner walked closer, inspecting the running engine carefully. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he admitted, but the journey wasn't finished. Over the following weeks, he restored exterior details, polished metal surfaces, replaced upholstery, and refined performance. Slowly, the vehicle transformed from scrap into a stunning vintage machine. Word spread beyond the scrapyard. Car enthusiasts visited to see the restoration. Some suggested contacting collectors or auction houses. Eventually, photographs reached an international buyer specializing in rare American classics. An offer arrived far larger than anything he had ever imagined earning. Holding the proposal in his hands, he realized the impossible had become real. The broken car that everyone abandoned had become his doorway to a new future, and soon, his life would change forever. When the payment finally arrived from the buyer overseas, the numbers on the bank transfer seemed almost unreal. The sum was more than he had earned in his entire working life as a driver. It was enough to completely change his circumstances. For the first time, he felt the weight of opportunity, resting firmly in his hands rather than on his shoulders. With careful planning, he reinvested the money. He purchased a modern truck first, then a second, and a third. Each vehicle expanded his capacity. What had begun as a single restoration project grew into a full-fledged transport business. He leased a small warehouse on the outskirts of Houston, establishing his own yard where trucks lined up neatly, engines humming and drivers ready to embark on long hauls. Contracts with factories, distribution centers, and businesses across the southern United States began to accumulate. His operation was no longer small, it was a legitimate competitor in a market dominated by larger, older companies. Months turned into a year, and the transformation was complete. From a single man with a vision and a scrap car, he had created a fleet of trucks and a stable business employing dozens of people. He managed the operations himself, learning logistics, finances, and the delicate art of negotiations. Success, which had once felt like a distant dream, was now his everyday reality. One day, his former employer contacted him. The factory that had once fired him urgently needed additional transport capacity to fulfill a massive contract. Trucks, drivers, and management were all required immediately. The company he had once served now had nowhere to turn except for outside help, and his business was perfectly positioned to supply it. When the factory owner arrived at his yard to inspect the fleet, he was stunned. Rows of shining trucks stretched as far as the eye could see, each meticulously maintained and ready for immediate deployment. The reality hit him hard. The driver he had once dismissed had become indispensable and immensely successful. "Whose company is this?" the former employer asked, incredulously. The man smiled faintly, calm and confident. "You know who it is," he replied, the words measured and deliberate. The factory owner froze, realization dawning. He remembered the long argument on the highway, the humiliation, the firing, and the dismissive laughter. His mind raced back to that night when he had treated a loyal, hard-working driver as worthless. Now the tables had turned completely. I need your help," the owner stammered, recognizing that his current operation depended entirely on this man's trucks and organization. He studied the former employer for a long moment. There was no anger in his gaze, only the quiet dignity of someone who had worked tirelessly to earn respect and independence. Finally, he spoke. "Years ago, you dismissed me," he said slowly, "but now I am in control of my own path. I will help you, but only on terms that honor the value of my work." The factory owner's face fell. He had expected subservience, not fairness. Panic and regret replaced confidence. "I'm sorry," he whispered, realizing the full weight of his previous actions. "I should never have fired you. Please, give me a chance." A subtle smile crossed the man's face. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He could have demanded more, refused, or exacted revenge. Instead, he chose measured grace. "Your mistake cost you," he said, "but I am not interested in revenge. I am interested in results." The former employer nodded, humility replacing his former arrogance. He recognized that this man, once considered a mere driver, had transformed his life through skill, perseverance, and vision. Respect, not authority or intimidation, had forged his success. The trucks rolled out efficiently to the factory site, their engines humming like a promise of reliability. Contracts were fulfilled ahead of schedule. Clients were impressed. Business thrived. Meanwhile, the man continued expanding. He purchased additional vehicles, including rare vintage trucks and high-capacity modern trailers. His fleet became synonymous with trust, punctuality, and professionalism. Every investment was a step toward further independence. He had created not just wealth, but stability, reputation, and influence in the industry. In quiet moments, he reflected on the journey. From a fired driver, humiliated and dismissed, to the owner of a thriving transport empire, the transformation had been total. It was not the money alone that mattered, it was proving that dedication, intelligence, and integrity could overcome even the harshest circumstances. The factory owner, humbled and repentant, occasionally sought advice. Each time, he was reminded that the past had been a lesson for both. Some scars of pride remained, but reconciliation was possible through recognition of true effort and merit. Through the years, he became a mentor to others, sharing knowledge of mechanics, logistics, and business management. He taught that opportunities often appear disguised as obstacles, that persistence and ingenuity could turn discarded objects into prized assets, and that respect was earned through action, not demanded through position. In the end, the scrapyard car that had once been considered worthless had not only restored a machine, it had restored a life, created a legacy, and redefined a man's place in the world. The former humiliation became a distant memory, overshadowed by achievement, resilience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that true success is built from determination, courage, and the refusal to be underestimated. The man who once had nothing now had everything. Not because the world had changed, but because he had changed it with his own hands.